This is the Illuminate podcast, a Sandy Boy production. Each week on the Illuminate podcast, the hosts will bring you insightful conversations and stories of people who are illuminating their own lives through their business, work, community, family, and world.
Hey friends, welcome to the Illuminate podcast. I am one of your hosts, Kristin Srour. You're listening to episode 76. Today's guest on the show is a hilarious social justice-minded mom of four, a writer and psychotherapist, Kristen Howerton. Her journey to motherhood was not easy. She became a mom of four in 4 years through both adoption and natural birth. You may know her from her book or social media, Rage Against the Minivan. And by the way, yes, she does drive a minivan now. In this episode, she shares about her family, her activism around racial justice, talking to her kids about race, and how she's managing pandemic life. Kristen's perspective on life is refreshing and funny, and I hope you love my conversation with her. Welcome, Kristen, to the Illuminate podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am super happy to have you here. You have been somebody that I have followed throughout COVID, so you have certainly helped with a real parenting mindset through this very interesting year that we've had.
Yeah, it's been a wild year.
A year. We're basically up on a year of this.
Yeah, pretty close.
It's hard to believe. I guess I never thought that we would be in this for a year.
I don't think any of us did. And I think it might be best that way because I think had we known that from the outset, I think we all would have freaked out a little bit more than we did.
I think that's probably right. Yeah. And of course now, I think most recently you've posted that you guys have been to the beach and that you're wearing shorts and short sleeves. And I am sitting here in Indianapolis with a space heater in my office, bundled up. So I am jealous that you have those nice warm escapes.
I do have to say, I think that those of us that live in warmer climates do have an advantage in the pandemic because we can keep going outside. And I can't imagine how cooped up people are feeling who are living in places where they can't do that.
Yeah, I have one of the co-hosts of this podcast. She's doing this 1,000 hours outside challenge. She's got 4 boys and they're good. They're braving the cold no matter what every day.
That's awesome.
So, which is good. Yeah. We have a 10-month-old, so it's felt a little bit harder to get out when it's like 5 degrees outside. If it's closer to the freezing level, we're good there. So, Kristen, you have classified yourself as so let me see if I can actually say this right, a skilled catastrophizer.
Catastrophizer.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, it's both a joke and also a little bit true. I tend to run anxious and I can make a catastrophe out of any situation, which I think is true for a lot of us. I tend to future cast and worry and, case in point, yesterday I had like a weird red blood vessel in my eye and, it's most likely nothing, but I project it to a stroke, That's what I do.
So then the pandemic hit and somebody who has this skill, what happens?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic was not great for anybody who suffers from anxiety. I think it took a lot for me, a lot of self-monitoring, a lot of self-care, and even still, I really did struggle with anxiety and insomnia throughout.
Mm-hmm. I think so many of us have and continue to do so. It's real. It's present every day. Yeah. So, Kristen, now you, so I know about you through your hilarious real book, Rage Against the Minivan. And we'll link it in the show notes, but it is a really good read for I don't even think you need to be a parent to read this book, because you just have a lot of insights on sort of when life is good enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you can assume that, and you've been through a lot in your life. So tell me a little bit about your family. You have 4 kids.
I have 4 kids, and it's funny because I even did a timeline in the book, like a visual timeline of when they joined my family, because it's a little bit out of order. But my oldest, we adopted from foster care when he was 6 months old. And then I had a biological child, and then we started the process to adopt a child from Haiti. And during that process, I had another biological child. So my middle child came to the family last.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. And 4 kids in 4 years, right? Something
Four
like
kids
that.
in 4 years. Yes, it was definitely a case of like, you know, I dealt with infertility and pregnancy loss for a long time and just really wanted to have kids. And then 4 years after the first child came, I had 4. So
It's funny how the world works that way.
yeah.
So walk me through a little bit about your process around adopting a son who was out of foster care,
Hmm.
and why you chose that route, and what the process was there.
Yeah. I mean, I had worked around the foster care system. I had worked in a group home, and I had worked as a social worker visiting families who were in the foster care system. So I knew that there were a lot of children waiting for families. I knew that there was just, a shortage of parents for these
Mm-hmm.
children, particularly for kids that weren't newborns or for kids who were not white. And so when I decided I wanted to adopt, that was just a really clear path for me. I just felt like I wanted to adopt a kid who was waiting for parents.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about, you're a white mom, you've adopted a black baby. What was, what did you do to prepare? What has that journey been like?
Yeah, I mean, I prepared the best I could, but you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I read books and we went to classes, and I certainly spoke with friends of color. But I had a steep learning curve. I think any parent does, because it's all theory until you are involved in the lived experience of your own child. So it's I'm learning every day. I mean, I'm still not there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is probably the number one trait that's needed for transracial adoption, is just a willingness to keep learning and to keep acknowledging that you don't know everything and that you need help. I can't raise 2 Black children in a vacuum by myself as a white person. I absolutely need and accept and am grateful for help from others.
Mm-hmm. And then what's your oldest son's name?
JAFTA.
Jepta. And then, and so does he have a relationship with his birth parents?
No,
Okay.
his birth parents are deceased.
Okay. And then your other son you adopted. Now,
Mhm.
how much younger is he?
So Kembe's 2 years younger than JAFTA, and we adopted him from Haiti, and
Okay.
his birth parents are also deceased.
Okay. And then have you spent time in Haiti, going back to his community that he's from?
We have. In fact, I'm sure we would have gone this year were it not for the pandemic. But yes, we do try to go back every couple of years, and we still have people that we know there, and we visit his orphanage, and yeah, we love visiting Haiti.
That's awesome. What was the process going? I mean, so foster care adoption, then to an international adoption, those have to be very different.
They are different, and they are uniquely stressful in their own ways. We adopted from foster care, and that can be a very fraught experience because, there's always a possibility that a child could be reunified with their birth parents, which I'm for. And, that possibility looked likely for a while and then ultimately was not, which, I had no voice in that decision, or I wasn't even privy to that decision at all. But with international adoption, particularly from Haiti at the time, it just took a really long time. And so we met him when he was 6 months old, and he came home at 3.5. So it took 3 full years for that adoption process to be completed. And that was really hard because he wasn't living with us. And so all we could do was visit.
So did you go regularly to visit him within that 3-year time span?
We did. And then on that last visit was when the earthquake happened. So we were there, myself and my daughter, and then with Kembe, we were all in the earthquake together. But yes, so we visited quite a bit so that he would know us, which was very helpful because, the way that he came home, he ended up being evacuated. It wasn't at all how we thought. We thought we would go there and pick him up and, say goodbyes, and it would be very ceremonious and slow. And, it ended up being rather traumatic. Like he and a bunch of other kids were put on a plane by military. And it was really good that we had visited so much because when he arrived at the States, we were familiar faces. I can't imagine what that would have been like. And then him arriving to strangers who were his parents. So I'm very grateful that we had the opportunity to really get to know him over those years.
That's great. And especially, 3.5, they know what's going on around them.
Yeah. I thought that was a really difficult age for him to experience all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then did he speak Creole?
He did.
Okay.
He did. And so it was funny because we'd been learning Creole, we had been, but once he arrived in the States, he very much did not want to speak Creole and he wanted to speak English.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He is that kid, that is just a big part of his personality. He wants to fit in. He wants to, I think he just wanted to talk like everybody else. And so it was funny. We would be talking to him in Creole and he would answer us back in English. So he learned English really fast.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if he's just to have that feeling of being fully integrated, that he was able to pick it up. I guess at that age, it is easier to pick up than when you're much older. But even so, I think they usually say it's 0 to 2 is the easiest to pick up multiple languages.
Yeah. And I think, he'd picked up some English in the orphanage. Mm-hmm. There were certainly English speakers who came in and out. And so, I think he had a little bit of a head start there. But yeah, he learned English very fast.
Okay. How did the other kids learn Creole?
We all learned, all the kids learned just some basics.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I thought we would all be speaking Creole for a while, but it went away pretty fast.
Okay. Now, are there any Haitian traditions or holidays or things that you incorporate into your family life now?
It's interesting because Kembe is both Haitian and Black, he's a Black American. And so I think, and I've actually asked him this and he would say this, I think he identifies, where he lives and in the groups that he's in more as Black than as Haitian. So the traditions that we tend to incorporate in the home are, I think, more around Black American traditions, because those are the circles that he's in and those are the opportunities that we have here. He's involved, and both my boys are involved in mentoring with 100 Black men, which is fantastic. And so they have a lot of things going on throughout the year. So we tend to lean more towards that, although anytime we can go get Haitian food or Caribbean food at all, we are there. But I think the ties to Haiti, we've tried more in just visiting. I think that nothing replaces, like no fabrication that I can create in my home is going to is going to even come close to him being able to really visit the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. Just being immersed in the culture that's there and taking in the sights and the sounds and the smells.
Yeah. I have tried my best to learn some Haitian dishes, and we do those every so often, and they love, in fact, it's funny, all the kids really love when I make plantains. And so anytime there's like a school assignment where they have to bring something from another culture, it's like, oh, we're going to make plantains. Like, that's the big, everyone gets excited about that. And then I have to make a double batch so they can eat them at home.
Nice. Tell me about the 100 Black Men organization that they're involved in.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It is a mentoring program. Well, it's a program for the community at large, but they have a mentoring program that is really their whole mantra is what they see is what they'll be. And so they have, professional Black men come and they learn STEM and they learn finances and they learn Black history. They, talk quite a bit about racism and stereotypes and, how to navigate the world as Black men. And it's just been a really incredible thing to have them be a part of.
That's awesome. I really like that the mantra of what they see is what they'll be.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
And
it is.
It really goes back to, the idea that representation matters in every level of society, right? In government leadership, in your community, in your family, like all these kinds of things really matter. And that really resonates with me.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I love it.
So you have, you do a lot of advocacy work on systemic racism, and I would just love to hear a bit about what you've been up to lately, what kind of advice you would give to other parents who are trying to make sure that they can help their children break this cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing is that we as adults need to learn to be comfortable talking about race and racism. And I think a lot of us, especially, Gen X, millennials, we were raised with parents who were well-meaning, but we got messages like, well, don't talk about race or just be colorblind. And, so that we didn't really grow up learning the language of talking about racism. We were kind of given messages that like, it'll go away if you don't look at it, which we all know that doesn't work with anything. And so I think, first of all, as the adults, as the parents, learning to be really comfortable talking about it, because if we're uncomfortable, they'll pick up on that. I mean, if we sit down to have a race conversation with our kids and we're nervous and sweating and bumbling, that's not going to leave a great message. And so I think we have to learn to talk about it. I think we have to educate ourselves. And there's so many resources at this point to do that. There's just really no excuse. And then I think parents need to see it as an ongoing conversation. So it's something that you talk about all the time. And it's, it's kind of like sex. It's like we used to think like you had the sex talk, and now we know actually it's better if we have like 20 to 30 sex talks with our kids, right? At every different age and developmental stage. And it's actually more helpful if it's organic and we pause a TV show or, and I think it's the same with race conversations. It's like when the Capitol insurrection happened a few weeks ago, we're watching the news and we pause and say like, how would this be different if these were Black people? Like, what do you think would be different? And let's look back at footage of some Black Lives Matter protests that happened at the same place. And what did the guards, what was the posture of the guards for that versus this? So I think finding those times and those ways to talk with kids, and then finding media that kids can engage in. And I think, for younger kids, there's lots of great picture books and things like that. But when you have teenagers, my goodness, I mean, there's so many amazing programs that you can watch. We love watching The Daily Show. They do a great job of talking about race. We really like W. Kamau Bell's show. There's so many opportunities to kind of expose teenagers to interesting conversations around race. There's another show my kids like I think it's called Thug Adjacent. But yeah, it's, just interesting. And what's fun for us is there's a lot of comedians talking about race. And so like the Dave Chappelle recent special, where it's funny and it's engaging for teenagers, but it's really powerful and profound at the same time.
Yeah. How do you approach the conversations with your daughters who are white and your sons who are Black? Do you talk together? Do you have separate conversations? Do you have different kinds of resources? I mean, what does the approach look like?
Yeah, I mean, we usually talk all together, but I think, again, it's me being comfortable with the concepts and, white parents, when they're talking to white kids, it's like you can help them understand that like, okay, I can look at my white privilege and I can see that this is a systemic problem, but I can do that without thinking like I'm therefore a terrible person, right? Or well, therefore I should feel guilty and bad. And so, just continuing to have those conversations too of like, what does our privilege look like? And what does it look like to lay it down? And what does it look like to use it for good? And what does it look like to invite people to the table of privilege? Like, how can we do that? And so I just think that us, again, having those natural, organic conversations all the time has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And, it will be interesting to see as all four of your kids, become adults, right? What are their ages now?
11, 14, and 16.
Okay. Man, you are in it, huh?
I'm in it.
Yeah, as they become adults and to see what kind of conversations, I mean, even obviously they're, probably emerging, but how they lead conversations, how they lead by their actions, because they've been part of these organic, open, house where it's comfortable to talk about it and it has to be talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I already see just a lot of emerging activism from all of them, which feels good. And I also, I take them with me when we go to Black Lives Matter protests, or, they've all been involved with advocacy stuff with me as well.
That's awesome. So, Kristin, you started your career as a family therapist, right? This is like way before kids.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so what does that mean, a family therapist?
Yeah, I mean, in the state of California, it's interesting. Every state kind of has a different designation, but it's just a licensed mental health worker. And in the state of California, it's marriage and family therapist. But, it's just general psychotherapy. So I worked with couples, I worked with individuals, and I worked with families doing therapy.
And how long did you do that?
About a decade.
A decade. Okay. And then what led you away from that? What did you do next?
Yeah, I mean, I was working as a therapist when I had kids, and it was just becoming more and more difficult. And as Kembe came home, so and then I had 4 little ones at home, it was just becoming increasingly difficult to deal with the emotional needs of my kids, which were high, and that is the case for many people who adopt, especially children who are not newborns. Like, they may have some attachment injuries or some other special needs that require a little bit more of your attention. And so I was definitely feeling that in my home. Like, I was doing a lot of therapeutic parenting at home, and I was just finding myself really depleted to then leave my home where I'm doing like a lot of attachment and engagement, and then go to a job where I'm doing those same kinds of things. And so I started pulling back a little bit, and then I started writing. And as the writing took off, I kind of transitioned to blogging as, how I was making a living as opposed to counseling.
Ah, okay. And what year was that?
I mean, it was, let's see, probably between 2007 and 2010 was when I was making that transition.
Okay. And it basically grew from there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah. Because now, I mean, because you have your podcast, you've got your book out, you're on all sorts of parenting circuits. I really appreciated your piece. Maybe it was was it in December from the New York Times?
Yes.
And my kids are younger than yours, but just thinking about all the decisions you had to think about sending your kids off to go play with their friends outside.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And gosh, I mean, there's just so many decisions that we all have to make these days.
I know. And it's really hard. And I don't always have the right answers. I don't always know what's right. It's like finding that balance between community care, which is important to me. I don't want my family to be responsible for spreading the virus, but at the same time, like figuring out how they can not feel completely isolated. It's a hard balance.
Yeah. You said in that article that you oriented your home to be one where all the kids came to your home. What does that look like? Teach me.
Well, I mean, I think one aspect is just, we have a pool and we have trampoline and we have the skate ramps, things like that. But I feel like beyond those things, it's more of just like making sure kids know that they're welcomed, and so I mean, what it sometimes looked like was a lack of boundaries, just in terms of like, yes, you can spend the night, and okay, I guess you can spend another night. And, before the pandemic, I mean, this house was full of kids all the time, all the time. And it's funny because, my kids who are in middle school, like they would have friends over and we would go down and talk to them late at night, like 10 p.m., 11 p.m. We might just be grabbing our tea or grabbing our coffee, and they would sit and talk with us for like an hour. And I think, there's something to be said for kids want to be seen and heard, even when they're in that cool stage, even when they're teenagers, like when they're really getting your undivided attention and interest. I think that does a lot for teenagers. And so I think, our house felt like a safe place. And, we had kids talk to us about really serious things. And so it's been really sad to kind of have to close up our house and not have that extended family that we had before.
Yeah. That is just the hardest part about this
I know.
pandemic.
I hate it. I really hate it.
Have you found any other connection points that work?
I mean, we have done, some backyard gatherings where, and what I have found works is that you just there has to be assigned seating. Like teenagers can't monitor. So, they can't. I mean, adults can't.
Yeah,
and so,
sure.
They show up and you've got, a seat for them and they sit in that seat until they leave and people leave their masks on. So we've done some things like that. We've done like an art night. We've done like a mafia game night. Charades, where everybody's stuff is at their seat when they arrive. So we've tried to find some safe ways. And, my kids skate, which in theory should be safe, skateboarding with friends. My girls have gone on bike rides to the beach with friends. So just trying to find those creative options where they can connect, but also be safe.
Yeah. I read the book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. She was also on Brene Brown's podcast. And I really liked, she just, in general, the book was definitely written pre-pandemic, but just about finding purpose in when you gather, whatever it is, whether it's a dinner party or a baby shower or celebration. Having purpose behind it and almost like objectives to it. But it definitely, I was thinking a lot about that with, the number of Zooms that we're doing, or when you're doing a backyard hangout, how you can be really intentional about the time. And so assigned seating fits right in there.
Yes.
And just having, or even, how do you make those connection points when you are virtual and you are trying to connect people together?
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of cool things have come out of this. I mean, the kids are playing Among Us with friends, which is a way they can connect online, or, they're finding games they can play online. But, I think it's tough because I think we all have some Zoom fatigue as well,
Yes.
I mean, my kids were like, they, particularly my girls are like really into theater, but mid-year I was like, hey, do you guys want to sign up for your acting classes? Which they've done for years. They love these acting classes. And they're like, no, I don't want to do another single thing online. Like, no. Like, tell me when they're in person again. And I'm like, I feel that. I feel you.
I know. My husband just often refuses to be on video Zoom. He's like, I just can't always be on video Zoom.
There's a special tax, I think, in being on video, especially when you can see yourself.
Yes.
I wish that I wish that all these platforms would have an option where you can turn off, because it's like staring in a mirror all day. And, then you're thinking about your appearance, you're thinking about what face you're making, you know what I mean? Like it's actually very distracting on an interpersonal relationship,
right.
I think.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, or just anticipating, what calls am I going to have today that I'm going to have to be on video, and how presentable should I be from the shoulders up, right?
Absolutely. I have definitely sat with pajama bottoms on and a business shirt on the top.
Oh, yeah. I know. That's like the pandemic outfit It'll be interesting to see how fashion evolves going into the world being normal again, but it probably won't be as formal as my guess.
I think not. I think we're all like, were jeans really our best option? They're really binding.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So I have kind of a funny question. So you started this Instagram handle called Asshole Parents.
Yes.
What happened to it? Why is that not still going?
It is. It's funny. Facebook, for whatever reason, banned the name. It might be because
Oh,
there was a curse word in the title. So it's there, but it's now under Rage Against the Minivan. But it's still all the same font.
okay. All right. Because I went to go look
Yes.
it up, and the last post was like 2018. And I'm like, I have probably 1,000 photos that I could add to this.
It is still there. It's still there. The hashtag is still really active, but the
Okay. The
actual
hashtag. All right. Okay.
but the actual handle is now at Rage Against the Minivan.
Okay. All right. Got it. Because I was like, I can feel this. This feels like my life at least once a day. Right. Did you create that as like an outlet for raising 4 kids that all showed up within a year?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Or 4
it was
years?
like I was just in that stage of like toddler ingratitude where you're just spending all day really trying to make life good for your children and they're just mad at you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They just hated me all the time. Like everything I did led to tears. Like you give them a burrito, but it has a piece of cilantro in it, so they're crying. Or the thing that really, the one that set off the asshole parents hashtag was I had given my daughter, I had planned a tea party for her and her stuffed animals, and everything was pink, and I cut her sandwich into shapes, and I made her favorite pink smoothie, but I gave her a straw that was the wrong color, and she threw herself on the floor in the middle of the tea party in a princess dress. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I can't do anything right by these kids.
Yep. I know that feeling well. When do they grow out of that?
I'm waiting. I'm still waiting. I'll let you know.
You were supposed to say when they're 5 because I have a 4-year-old now. It's like the
Right?
one little thing. It's like the thing you would never think that sets it off, and then they set off.
I mean, to be honest, I write about this in my book, I actually think that there's a window of parental enjoyment, and it's between like 6 and 12 because they can toilet independently and they are not, as emotionally volatile. And then they turn 12 and then they hate you again. But like 6 to 12 is kind of magic.
All right. Good to know. I'm going to remember that. And if it's not, I'm going to come back.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Come back to you.
I apologize in advance.
So, Kristen, you wrote an article in the Washington Post about coaching our kids through loss. You wrote this earlier on in the pandemic. So first of all, can you just talk a little bit about what your advice in there was? But then maybe has that changed as we've continued on down this journey?
I know. What did I know back then? No, I think it's still the same, which is, that we have to find that balance between, we want to affirm our kids' feelings of loss, but at the same time, we don't want to add to them. And so I was just seeing a lot of parents, especially at the beginning, using language like, oh, school is ruined, or this is ruining their childhood, or they're going to be traumatized. And it's like, there could be trauma and there's definitely losses, but it's also really important to model for our kids that we can be resilient, that we can be flexible. And it's a balance. I mean, it's not easy. I think it's a tightrope that parents are all figuring out how to walk, but I just, I feel like we have to continually be telling our kids and ourselves, like, this is temporary. We can find joy in the middle of this. Your childhood is not ruined. It's just different. But at the same time, all of these things that you're grieving are totally valid, and your feelings of grief are completely valid. But it's like finding the way to pivot, right? It's finding the way to like, okay, well, this year isn't going to look like we thought it would, but how can we make it look like something that's different that we could still enjoy,
Yeah, I think that's really sage advice, and it's ultimately finding the joy in the pivot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's hard. That's an uphill climb sometimes. And we don't get there every day. But, for us, for our family, it's been like, okay, I can look back and say, okay, this year we absolutely went to the beach more. We all read more. We started a family kind of reading time, and that's been really beautiful. We've gotten closer together as a family. Like, I can look back and see the things that have come from this that we didn't expect that have been really beautiful. Now, that's not to say, oh, I'm so grateful for the pandemic, because I'm not. I wish I wish that there wasn't one.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like we can hold all these things to be true at once, that like it's actually been totally horrible and there's been a ton of losses and disappointments, but there's also been some real beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about your family reading time.
Well, I mean, first of all, don't get me wrong, they were kicking and screaming at the
Sure. I'm
beginning.
sure it was messy getting there, right?
It's real messy, but it's like, again, the thing in the pandemic is like we don't have anything happening. We were an overscheduled family before. Like
Hmm.
we were eating on the sidelines of practices and rehearsals. Everyone had something all the time, and now we have nothing. I mean, we're in California. There's no sports. There's no nothing. Every evening's free. And so as we're figuring out what to do with our long unscheduled evenings, of course, it's like we eat our family meal and we've been doing these like table topics, which is really fun. But I really wanted to put reading in there. And so I instituted like, we're going to do 30 minutes of reading before we watch television. And, initially it was like, oh, this is lame. This is so dumb. But now I will like walk downstairs and they're doing it on their own.
I love
It's
it.
just become a habit. And, what do they say? 2 weeks to build a habit. And, it took 2 weeks of complaining and now it's just a habit. And we're all, myself included, we're all reading more as a result.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you went from an overscheduled family. Normal is going to be, I don't know what normal is going to be. For a long time, I'm like, oh, we're just all going to be vaccinated and it's going to be normal. And
No.
clearly that's not the way the world is going. It will be an evolving new normal for years, probably. But are there things about the non-schedule that you will keep in your life going forward?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think that I can look back and realize like that we were just running at too hard of a pace,
Mm-hmm.
and I see the benefits of slowing down. And what I really see the benefits of is teaching my kids how to have a leisure life of their own, like that, almost like how to be instead of how to do. I think that's been really valuable. We've all learned how to cook. It's almost like my kids are learning adult self-care skills right now, which is really beautiful. We didn't have time for that before.
Yeah, that is great, especially
Yeah.
at their ages.
Yeah.
I know I mean my kids are still young enough that there's not the overscheduling syndrome that for their ages, but I am excited about that feeling where not everybody like not having to be overscheduled, right? Where that's like okay and that's the norm. But I will say that the connecting with people, just like those in-person relationships, I am going to overschedule that whenever I can. I miss that
Absolutely.
so much.
I know. We keep joking that when this is all over, we're gonna have a party every night.
Right? I just want my dinner table filled with people.
I know. Me too. I do too.
I miss it so much.
I do too.
Yeah. So I'm going to happily, unabashedly overschedule time with people.
I think that that's a good plan.
Well, Kristin, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
I loved hearing more about your family, and I've just enjoyed following you. So it's really an honor to have you on the show today. I wanted to bring you to our end of podcast questions, just to round us out. So you are somebody who is illuminating in your life, in your community, in the influencer world. And I'd love to hear who is somebody that's illuminating for you.
I think, I think that someone who is illuminating for me on the topic of race, I think that there's a couple of people who've been really instrumental for me. Let's see. I really appreciate, first of all, Lovey Ajayi. She's actually a humor memoirist and she's a comedy writer. But she also writes really insightfully about race, and I've always appreciated her voice. And she does it in a very approachable way and an understandable way. So she's someone who has always kind of lighted that path for me. I think D. Ray is someone who I've followed for a long time, who's just been a major activist in the Black Lives Matter movement, and he's someone who I follow for a long time. And then just in terms of, let me think, just in terms of parenting, I mean, I think, well, Brene Brown, I mean, she has been so helpful for me. And while her content isn't particularly specific to parenting, I just find it so helpful, and so interesting. And I'm a clinician, so I love that all of her stuff is really steeped in research. So that's always been really helpful to me. Yeah.
Those are great examples.
Yeah.
Do you have a book recommendation?
I think if people are really wanting to kind of start out on the path of looking at anti-racism, I think the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, you can't go wrong there. Like, that's just such a good one. There's another book called The Warmth of Other Suns that gives a really comprehensive background into racism. Like, it kind of, it's the history.
I
That's
love
a really good
that
one.
book.
Yeah, really
it's
good.
painful, but it is captivating.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say those two books are the best place to start.
Those are great recommendations. And then, okay, so this podcast actually started on through a supper club, and I listened to your most recent podcast, your selfie, talking about all of the food delivery options that you have. So first of all, thank you for those.
Yeah.
Because there's a few things in there that I'm going to have to implement for our family. But it sounds like food, your family has a lot of revolving around food. So do you have a recipe that you guys love, that you go to, that you share with others?
Oh, that's interesting. I will admit I'm not a recipe person. I like to cook, but I am definitely a throw things together. Like, if someone asked me, like, well, how many cups or teaspoons, I would be like, I don't know. Like,
oh man, I'm the opposite.
I'm that person. But I will say that our go-to lately has been, we are like obsessed with roasting vegetables. Like, I got these 2 huge sheet pans that fit the entire length of my oven. I measured my oven and ordered sheet pans to fit, because there's obviously so many of us also at home. And then I got some parchment liners that fit those perfectly. And I have just been obsessed with roasting any vegetable that comes into the house.
Okay, I love
and
that.
Then you put it
but
on
my
rice.
Next question is, do you have an air fryer?
I do, and I love my air fryer.
Okay. Do you roast your vegetables in there?
I don't. Well, sometimes it kind of depends. I mean, to be honest, there's so many of us that gets difficult.
Yeah, true.
But if it's just me, then yes. If it's just 2 of us, then yes. But if it's for the whole family, it's going to go in the oven.
I was clearly living under a rock for a long time, because we just got an air fryer, and I'm like, how did we not have one of these before?
It's awesome. My kids use it all the time too. It is used every day in my house.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, and then my last question is, what is your message for the world?
I hope my message for the world is empathy. I think that has just been the space that I've tried to inhabit on the internet for a long time. I used to, when my blog started, I did a series called What I Want You to Know. And it invited people of all different walks of life, people who wanted others to understand better about what it's like to be deaf, or what it's like to have a genetic syndrome, or what it's like to have a child with autism. And I just provided a space where people could talk about those things in the hope that readers would have more empathy for those situations. And so, and even now in talking about race or immigration issues, I hope people will broaden their minds and their hearts and have more empathy towards others. That's a big one for me.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, friends, for being here. If you loved today's episode, or you've been loving the Illuminate podcast and you haven't done so, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It's how we bring new listeners into the show. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful week.